Hello everybody, this is David from the Mr. Black YouTube channel. Today I'm going to go over everything that I recently covered in subnetting. So I'm going to be calling this Listen Using Everything We've Learned. My prerequisite knowledge that I need you to know is just have seen all the previous videos and gotten in all the information. Now let's start answering our question. So our question says, a hospital worker has asked that you divide the hospital's network into 14 subnets. They also ask that you find the network ID, broadcast ID, new subnet mask, and total usable hosts per subnetwork. They give you the IP address 156.75.23.2/8 to work with. Alright? Divide the network into subnetworks before answering the questions below. So we're going to be doing that first. Alright? So to start, the first thing I see is that this is a /8 network. Okay, so notice that the first octet, because if you remember our very first video, we went over classifying networks. Well, remember how I said even though some IP addresses, they can use like a class B or a class C or a class A, but they can actually be subnetted in an entirely different way. And we see that here, because even though that this is a class B network, because it's between the number of 128 and 191 at 156, in the first octet, if you look over here to the CIDR notation, it's classified as a sorry, it's not classified. It's subnetted as a class A network. And since it has that /8, we know that the subnet mask is going to be equal to 255.0.0.0. Okay? So because we know that the subnet mask is 255.555.0.0, because of this CIDR notation, we know that we are going to be separating the network and the host bits between the first and second octet, just like this. Alright, so these are going to be your network bits. These are going to be your host bits. What's the first host octet? Or in other words, what's the first host octet? Because we always work with the first host octet when we do these problems. Okay? The first host octet is the second octet of the subnet mask, which is this .0 right after the .255. So what you're going to do is, if you think about it like this, right? So there is 8 host bits in this. So for this second octet, the binary looks like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we need 14 networks. Okay, well, how do we do that? Well, we ask ourselves, 2 to the power of what will give us greater than or equal to 14? Okay? So if you think about it, we have 2 cubed, which is 2 to the 3rd power. That gives us 8 networks. But if we do 2 to the 4th power, we get 16. So we can't get exactly 14. We need to get greater than or equal to 14 though. So we can't use 2 cubed. We have to use 2 to the 4th power. Alright? So what this is going to look like is we are going to borrow 4 host bits from this octet, and we're going to make them network bits. So now the binary is going to look like this in our second octet. So now this octet right here that I'm highlighting is going to have the binary 11110000. Alright, because we borrowed 4 host bits. Remember, host bits are your zeros, network bits are your ones. So we borrowed 4 host bits and gave them to network bits. So that is how we divide. So now we basically divided this network into 16 networks. Okay. So, continuing on with this problem though. So we have the network divided up. So we're going to have to ask, what's the new subnet mask? Well, if you know your binary, we know it's 255, right? That's going to be the first one. Is 255. Okay. So we have 255. Okay, and then dot. So we know that's 1111 8 times for the first octet in the subnet mask. So that's 255 because that's what they add up to. And then we have 128 plus 64 plus 32 plus 16. So what's that add up to? Well, we have 128 plus 64 plus 32 plus 16, which is 240. So this next digit is going to be 240. and the rest of the digits in the subnet mask are not going to change. So those are going to remain zeros. Okay. Now, network ID. So if you look at the network ID now, remember what I said about the subnet mask. Okay? If we have 255, that digit's not going to change for the network ID. And then we know that the third and the fourth octet are just going to be zeros. So we have 240 here, right? So in order to know what 240 is, we have to write out our original second octet right here in binary. So we have to write out 75 in binary. And then we have to write out the binary for the second octet here, which is 240. And then we have to do our addition problem. And I covered that in the last video. So please watch that video if you would like to understand. But I will go ahead and do that really quickly. So I will write each out in binary. Hold on one moment. Alright guys, so I went ahead and wrote out our subnet mask for 240 and our IP address in binary. Again, if you want, you can use a calculator, a binary calculator. If you can know how to do it by hand, sure thing, go ahead. I'm just using a calculator to save time. So again, it's like an addition problem. So whenever there's two ones, we're going to put a 1 down. Anything else, we're going to put a 0. So we got 0 plus 1, that's 0. 1 plus 1, that's 1. 0 plus 1, that's 0. 0 and 1, that's 0. 1 and 0, that's 0. And as you can see, the last three are also going to be zeros. Okay? So we got 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. That is our binary for our third digit in the subnet mask. Because if you think about it like this, I mean, think about it. Like, we have these two here, right? So in the subnet mask, that's 255. This one's never going to change. These two for the network ID are going to be 0 because they're 0 in the subnet mask. So really the only one that we're going to change is this one. And this right here, this little like binary adding, that's how we find it. So I'm going to go ahead and write that out. So our network ID is going to be 156 because that's not going to change. Dot. And then if we know our binary, we know it's 128.64, so that's 64 right there. Dot 64. Dot 0. Dot 0. All right. So there we go. We got our network ID. Now we have our host ID, or sorry, our broadcast ID. So once you have your network ID, now if we go back to the subnet mask, I'm going to get rid of this down here. So if we look at the bits of our second octet in the subnet mask, what you'll notice is that we have 4 network bits and 4 host bits. So when you find your network ID, if you take 2 to the power of however many host bits are in the binary of the subnet mask where you're working on your host octet, which is this one right here, we have 4 host bits here, these 4 zeros. If we take 2 to the power of 4, we get 16. So what that means is our next network ID is going to be 156, and then 64 plus 16, which is 80. All right. So this is our next network ID, right? And you might be asking, why did I have you find that? Well, if you find your next network ID, finding the broadcast ID is really easy. Because for the broadcast ID, all you have to do is just subtract 1. So if we subtract 1 from this network ID, we get 156.79.255.255. And indeed, for our next network ID, in this case, our broadcast ID, it is 156.79.255.255. All right. So now that we have our broadcast ID, the last question in this problem asks us to find the total usable hosts per subnetwork. So again, what we have to do in order to find our total usable hosts per subnetwork, what we have to do is we have to count the total number of host bits in our subnet mask, and then take 2 to the power of however many host bits there are in total, minus 2. So if we look at the subnet mask, so remember, binary for the second octet in our new subnet is these 4 zeros, right? So those are our 4 host bits. Plus, there's 8 host bits in the third octet in the subnet mask, and then there's 8 host bits in the fourth. So we have 8 in the third one, 16 if you add the other 8 in the fourth one, and the third one we have plus 4, right? So 16 plus 4, that's 20. So we take 2 to the power of 20, and then we subtract 2, and then the answer we have, which I have on my other screen, our total usable hosts per subnetwork are 1,048,574 total host bits that we can use per each subnetwork. Alright? So that was a pretty tricky thing. And then one last thing I want to show you before I go. So remember when we divided the network earlier with the subnet mask, and this subnet mask went from this to this subnet mask? The one thing I would like to, a quick shortcut you can take, is the new CIDR notation for the network. You just take whatever number this is, and you just take however many host bits you borrowed for network bits. So in this case, we borrowed 4 zeros for 4 ones, so we borrowed 4 host bits for 4 network bits. So you just add 4 network bits to this, right? So our new CIDR notation, if you want to get specific, is /12, because you just take 8 plus 4. So /12, you just add the network bits onto the end of the CIDR notation. The old CIDR notation, that is. And there you have it.